10 murders, 1 attempted murder, and hundreds of photographs of women still waiting to be identified. For more than 20 years, someone hunted women in South Los Angeles. Then, he vanished. Years later, the killings began again. After decades of dead ends, investigators finally caught him because of something almost everyone throws away: a slice of pizza. But the way they caught him would become one of the most controversial investigations in American history. This is Closed File Number 1, The Grim Sleeper. The story begins in South Los Angeles during the summer of 1985. At the time, many neighborhoods were already struggling with rising violence, addiction, and poverty. Few people could have imagined that a serial killer was about to begin one of the longest murder sprees in Los Angeles history. On August 10, 1985, the body of 29-year-old Deborah Jackson was discovered in an alley near West Gage Avenue in South Los Angeles. She had been shot multiple times in the chest. At the time, her murder appeared to be another tragic act of violence in a city already overwhelmed by crime. But it wouldn't be the last. Almost exactly 1 year later, on August 12, 1986, 35-year-old Henrietta Wright was found dead in an alley near Vernon Avenue. She too had been shot. 2 days later, another body was discovered. 36-year-old Thomas Steele was found dead near 71st Street and Halldale Avenue. Although investigators would later suspect a connection, his case was never officially included among the murders for which anyone was convicted. Then the killings continued. On January 10, 1987, 23-year-old Barbara Ware was found dead on East 56th Street. 3 months later, on April 15th, 26-year-old Bernita Sparks was discovered inside a trash bin near Western Avenue. On Halloween of 1987, another victim was found: 26-year-old Mary Lowe. Her body was found discarded in an alley. By now, detectives were beginning to notice similarities. The victims were often found outdoors. Many of them lived in vulnerable circumstances. Many of them struggled with addiction. Several were known to work the streets, and nearly all had been killed in remarkably similar ways. The bodies kept appearing. The motive was still unknown, but the pattern remained the same: young women, South Los Angeles, a .25 caliber handgun, and a killer who always seemed to disappear before anyone could identify him. By the end of 1988, fear had quietly settled over parts of the city. Women working the streets began sharing warnings. Rumors started to spread. Some believed a predator was hunting vulnerable women. Others dismissed the similarities as coincidence. As for the police, they still had no suspect, no name, no face. Then, on the night of November 20th, 1988, something happened. A 30-year-old mother named Initra Washington accepted a ride from a man driving an orange Ford Pinto. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, out of nowhere, the driver pulled out a handgun and shot her. Most victims never got the chance to tell their story. But Initra Washington survived. She later recalled regaining consciousness inside the moving vehicle. There, she realized she had been assaulted and left at the mercy of the man who had just tried to kill her. Eventually, she was pushed from the vehicle and left for dead. But somehow she lived. For the first time, investigators had something: a witness, someone who had seen the killer, someone who had survived him. She was the breakthrough the detectives were hoping for. Morale was high, and then it came crashing down, because suddenly, the murders stopped. Months went by, then years. No new victims connected to the pattern. No arrests. No answers. The predator who had terrorized South Los Angeles seemed to have vanished without a trace. And for the next 14 years, the case would remain frozen in time. For 14 years, the trail remained cold. No new victims showed any connection to the case. No arrests, no suspects, no answers. As the years passed, many investigators began to wonder if the killer was gone for good. Perhaps he had died. Perhaps he had been imprisoned for another crime. Or perhaps he had simply moved on. Whatever the reason was, the murders appeared to have stopped. Then, the fear returned. On March 9, 2002, a body was discovered. The victim was 15-year-old Princess Cheyenne Berthomew. She had been strangled and left in circumstances that immediately caught investigators' attention. For the first time in more than a decade, detectives began considering a possibility they had hoped would never become reality. The fear the city had once lived with had returned. Then, on July 11, 2003, the body of 35-year-old Valerie McCorvey was discovered in an alley near 108th Street. The similarities to the murders from the 1980s were impossible to ignore. The victim's profile, the location, the method. The same questions that haunted detectives in the 1980s suddenly returned. Then, 4 years later, in January 2007, another victim was found. This time, it was 29-year-old Janisha Peters. Her body was discovered in a dumpster behind a restaurant. The discovery shocked investigators. Now, they were sure the pattern had returned. By now, detectives were convinced they were dealing with the same offender responsible for the murders from the 1980s. The evidence was becoming difficult to dismiss. The victims shared similar backgrounds. The crimes occurred within the same general areas, and most importantly, advances in forensic science were revealing connections that detectives decades earlier could only suspect. DNA recovered from multiple crime scenes pointed toward a single offender. The serial killer had not disappeared. He had simply gone silent. The media picked up the story and soon coined a name for him: the Grim Sleeper. The nickname reflected the 14-year gap between the murders of the late 1980s and the killings that resumed in the early 2000s. But many investigators questioned whether he had truly stopped killing at all. Some believed there could be additional victims who had never been connected to the case. Others suspected there were victims who had never been found. The truth may never be known. What detectives did know was that they finally possessed something they had never had before: DNA, a genetic fingerprint left behind by the killer himself. But there was another problem investigators faced. The DNA profile didn't match anyone in the criminal databases. The evidence proved the killer existed, but it still couldn't tell investigators who he was. Years passed as detectives continued searching for a name. Then, in 2008, investigators tried something that had rarely been used before: a controversial forensic technique known as familial DNA searching. Instead of looking for an exact match, detectives searched for someone biologically related to the killer. The results pointed toward a young man whose DNA was already in the system. The DNA wasn't a match, but it was close. Very close. Close enough to suggest a relation. For the first time in more than 20 years, detectives had a legitimate suspect. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed proof. And to get that proof, they would have to watch. They would have to wait and hope the man made a mistake. Eventually, he did. The suspect was a former city sanitation worker named Lonnie David Franklin Jr. He lived in South Los Angeles, less than a few miles from many of the locations connected to the murders. Neighbors described him as quiet, friendly, ordinary, the kind of man who blended into the background, which made the possibility of him committing the crimes even more disturbing. For years, one of Los Angeles's most elusive serial killers may have been living an apparently normal life while remaining hidden in plain sight. Detectives knew that they could not make an arrest based on suspicion. They had to wait for an opportunity to get a sample of his DNA, a strand of hair, a tear, or blood, anything. They tailed him for days, patiently waiting for an opportunity. And then came the moment investigators had been waiting for. In July of 2010, Franklin attended a birthday celebration at a pizza restaurant in Buena Park. Detectives conducting surveillance followed him there. As the gathering came to an end, an undercover investigator posing as a busboy approached the table and collected several discarded items. Among them was a partially eaten slice of pizza, along with cups, utensils, and other items that might contain DNA. The evidence was sent for testing. Then investigators waited. When the results came back, they confirmed what detectives had suspected. The DNA recovered from the discarded items matched the DNA profile connected to multiple crime scenes. After more than 25 years, investigators finally knew who they were looking for. On July 7, 2010, officers moved in. Lonnie Franklin Jr. was arrested outside his home. The mystery that had haunted South Los Angeles for decades had finally begun to unravel. But detectives were about to discover something even more disturbing. When investigators searched Franklin's property, they recovered hundreds and eventually thousands of photographs and images depicting women. Some appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge. Many of the women were never identified. To this day, authorities continue attempting to identify individuals found in those photographs. For detectives, this discovery raised a chilling possibility. The number of victims connected to Franklin might be far greater than anyone realized. As the investigation continued, prosecutors began assembling a case built on decades of evidence: DNA, ballistics reports, crime scene analysis, witness testimony, and, most importantly, the account of Anitria Washington, the woman who had survived. For years, Washington's description of her attacker had remained one of the few direct connections to the killer. Now, investigators finally had the science to support her story. The trial began in 2016. Prosecutors argued that Franklin had targeted vulnerable women throughout South Los Angeles, often selecting victims who lived on the margins of society. Specifically, those women whose disappearances might not immediately attract public attention. The defense challenged aspects of the investigation, including the use of familial DNA searching. But the evidence against Franklin was overwhelming. On June 6, 2016, the jury delivered its verdict. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was found guilty on 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. After decades of uncertainty, the families of the victims finally had answers. Franklin was sentenced to death. Yet many questions remained. Why had he stopped for 14 years? Had he truly stopped at all? How many women in the photographs had crossed paths with him? And how many victims were never discovered? Those questions may never be answered. In March of 2020, while incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison, Franklin was found unresponsive in his cell. He was pronounced dead at the age of 67. The man known as the Grim Sleeper would never leave prison. But even after his death, the investigation continues. Authorities still believe there may be additional victims, more families waiting for answers, eager to know what happened to their loved ones. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Authorities believe Franklin may have been responsible for significantly more murders than the 10 for which he was convicted. For decades, the Grim Sleeper exploited something more powerful than darkness. He exploited indifference. Many of his victims lived on the margins of society, and for years their disappearances failed to receive the attention they deserved. In the end, the case was solved not by a confession, not by a witness coming forward, but by persistence, forensic science, and a discarded slice of pizza that took 20 years to catch up to him. The killer was caught, the mystery was solved, but the unanswered questions remain. How many victims were there? How many names were never connected to the case? And how many stories are still waiting to be found? The identities of many women found in those photographs remain unknown, and for some families, closure never fully arrived.